We're taking a data-driven approach today. We're going to talk data and we're going to leave emotion out of it. Tell us more about the study.
This we've never seen actually mentioned anywhere before. This is a novel finding that we've found. The better you do optimize for Surfer, the better your results will be in those niches.
Over-optimized content, as it were. So what's the balance there?
Everything comes back to money, and so does the algorithm. And what that means is,
what are you bringing to the table that Google has never seen before, that a search engine hasn't seen before? What gain are you providing?
so information gain is the most important thing that you can be doing right now.
Those 2 points right there are super fascinating.
We have this really cool situation with one client. All they wanted was ERO and no SEO. We tripled their traffic in about 6 months just from A/B testing this process.
One of the things you recommended, the first thing on my list, is to enhance the topic coverage.
Quality of the content that you write for each keyword that you're going after needs to be.
How do people think about improving site speed in a day and age where they also need to improve engagement metrics kind of simultaneously?
Yeah, like the thing is like you find that like if people are building their own WordPress sites, and the thing about when you use like a dedicated WordPress hosting solution is you.
All right, welcome back to the Niche Pursuits podcast. My name is Jared Bauman. Today we're joined by Brie Moreau. Brie, welcome on board.
Thanks for having me, Jared.
It is good to have you here. We're gonna get nerdy here today. We're gonna talk data, and I love topics like this, and we get an entire podcast. But a topic that is really apropos, I think, for the majority of listeners. And we're going to go through a study that you put together. You got published in Search Engine Journal. It relates to Google. It relates to some updates and core updates. So we're going to get into all the details. Before we do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been doing SEO for 18 years now. And when I started doing SEO, I started doing affiliate stuff before 2011, the good old days. And then when the first algorithm hit, I found myself soul searching and all that kind of stuff. Then I went to agency world, worked for some very large, prestigious international, multinational agencies, and loved the technicality of the large site kind of work. But I hated the corporate life. Then I basically quit my agency. It's a bit more of a story than that. But basically, I was the first ever remote person in the company. I said, you have to hire me as a remote employee. And this was like 9 or 10 years ago. And they freaked out and they let me be remote in Australia. And then after that point, I said, I'm going to go to Bali now and I'm going to work from Bali. And they're just like, no way, you can't do that. And then I said, well, I am. And I gave them an ultimatum and they didn't allow me to move to Bali as an employee. So I moved to Bali and started my own digital marketing agency. So I have the longest running remote digital marketing agency out of Australia. In that time, I also set up an international digital marketing conference called DMSS that basically we had speakers like Ahrefs, SEMrush, all the big names. We also had NASA as a headliner one year as well. That got killed by COVID. We have a team of about 70 employees. We do everything from SEO, backlinking, web analytics, conversion rate optimization, and data science as well. And what we've been doing these days has been heavily focused on data science and machine learning, and really specializing in that area because we found that that's once you start working on big sites, the next stage after that is actually to apply machine learning and data science to that process. And we're kind of innovating in that area a lot. The data study that we'll go through today is just kind of like a little snapshot of like, hey, this is what you guys can see that we can do. But the reality is the stuff that we're doing within data science and machine learning is like, I don't think it's been done before, specifically from a link building perspective.
Hey everyone, Spencer here, founder of Niche Pursuits. Are you adding a new internal link pointing to each article you publish? You should be. Ever find it time-consuming and a bit overwhelming? Remembering what content you published and deciding which anchor text to use can be a real headache. What if there was a better way? Well, that's exactly why I created Link Whisper. Simply click Add Inbound Internal Links, and Link Whisper will scan your site in seconds and suggest the most relevant links with appropriate anchor text for your new article. Now simply check the box next to the internal links you want to add, and Link Whisper will add these links for you. No need to go into each article, edit, and add the link. It's already done. No more manual internal link building or guesswork. Just efficient, accurate linking that saves you time and improves your SEO. Transform your content strategy with Link Whisper. Start linking smarter, not harder. Use the coupon code podcast for $15 off. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use coupon code podcast to get $15 off.
Well, why don't you lead us into the study that we're going to be going through today? I'll read the title from Search Engine Journal where the results were published. 260,000 search results analyzed. Here's how Google evaluates your content. And it's, again, the subtitle is Dive into Analysis of the SERPs to understand how Google evaluates content with a recent helpful content update. Now, we have talked at length about the HCU. We've talked at length about the subsequent March 2024 core update that you could say piggybacked off the HCU. We have a lot of listeners because of what we focus on here who have types of sites that were pretty heavily impacted globally in terms of like just site-wide impacts from that. So this is a really interesting topic. And I think data-wise, we're going to go through this. Now, a lot of people are going to have emotion tied into what this has done as well. So I'll just say at the outset, like, we're taking a data-driven approach today. We're going to talk data, and we're going to leave emotion out of it. That's what Spencer and I do every Friday on the news section of the podcast. We rant and we rave about different things, but today we're just going to look at it from a data standpoint. Tell us more about the study, about how you came up with the numbers, because there's so many interesting findings that we're then going to walk through and navigate each one topically speaking.
Yes, certainly, Jared. So the first thing is we collaborated with Eric Van Biskirk from Clickstream. And so basically, he was the guy that did a lot of the data studies for Brian Dean and Neil Patel back in the day. So he was employed as he basically oversee all the data, a lot of the data studies for those guys. So he's pretty much the granddaddy of SEO data studies. So a lot of those Brian Dean ones you would have seen, that was actually Eric's work. So we partnered up with him, and the reason why we partnered up with him is because basically he had an incomplete data study that he was doing for SurferSEO, and we kind of said, hey, well, like, why don't we come in with our data science team and basically finish off the study for you? So essentially, the study is technically Eric's study in a lot of ways, and it's not the way that we would have approached this study, to be completely honest with you, but it's what we had to work with, and getting exclusive access to SurferSEO's data is incredibly valuable. So we basically overtook the project, and so what happened was, what had Eric done? He'd basically he'd got 263,000 or whatever search engine results pages, and then he also got I think like 8,000 specific like keywords and terms, and like segmented them into banned, non-banned, commercial intent keywords. So basically what we did in that process is we kind of overlap those two databases together to start the data study.
Let's get into some of the findings if we can. Maybe we'll have time to circle back on it.
Otherwise it'll stay a little bit too overwhelming for people. I think easy.
You always like to give them the the good stuff at the beginning, keep them hooked, and then we'll get into some of the nerdy calculations. I do want to hear about it. I do want to hear about it.
Yeah,
I do want to hear about it. But I think I like there's just so much to unpack. That's what has me concerned. I've got 11 or 12 things I want to get to, and we only have an hour. So we talked about this ahead of time. I broke it down topically. You thought that was a good idea. So let's kind of topically navigate through it. If we have time, we'll kind of get to nuance around about it. We're going to look at some of the findings. We'll call it the high-level findings that kind of came out of this, and we'll go through it topically speaking. And I think the first one is the connection, whether you want to call it YMYL, which is your money, your life. And so that would extend beyond just health-related categories into money, fitness, lifestyle potentially, right? Like your money, your life can get into finance and fitness and health and all these things. But there's YMYL and there's fitness, there's health, and there's the correlations you guys saw as it relates to the impact that this update and these updates had on health-related topics and non-health-related topics on YMYL pages versus non-YMYL pages. Let's start there. Can you unpack what you guys uncovered with that?
Yeah, so essentially there's a positive correlation with Surfer's content score and YMYL pages, meaning that since the core update, that Surfer SEO's content score is a higher predictor of success in those areas. And what that essentially means is the better you do optimize for Surfer, the better your results will be in those niches. That's the shorthand version.
Okay.
What does that mean in the real world? It means that basically the more that you have topical authority in that YMYL niche, the higher predictor you have of success in that niche. Now, what does topical authority mean? Topical authority obviously means, like covering a topic, broad and deep, right? So broad meaning like, let's just say it's the personal finance niche. You cover all the topics within personal finance, and then you cover it comprehensively down as well. And one thing that I saw that I found quite interesting, and this isn't like the issue that we have a lot of time with these studies is that we're obviously a lot of those big sites like Business Insider, Entrepreneur.com, Forbes, and that they can just kind of cherry pick and put a page out and just outrank most people, which is what I'm sure a lot of people have been experiencing recently. Now, the way to get around that is to basically make sure that, because you'll find on the very large authority sites, they don't really have a topical cluster. They generally tend to they just tend to write pages from the home URL and just spray and pray. So essentially, in order to kind of combat that and beat that, because that was the old style, like you'd be able to have a smaller website and just put those slash URL and put that one keyword in there and then hope, and it used to rank, right? And now it's more about having that cluster done in a really, really comprehensive way, which I'm sure your audience is aware of. But this is one advantage that the little guy can have over these authority sites.
When you talk about the content score from SurferSEO, is that, I mean, I've used it, but for the general sake of the audience, is that basically focused on optimization? And the second question of that would be, and maybe navigate through this, a lot of people have surmised that the HCU and subsequent March core update actually came after over-optimized content, as it were. So what's the balance there? Was there any sort of balancing act you saw in this study?
Yeah, of course, over-optimized content, insert keyword here, keyword here, keyword here, keyword here. That would obviously send alarm signals to Google. Now, on the other side of that equation, what we've done, regardless of this data study, what we've done is we've taken Google's BERT LLM, Google's basically large language model. We've basically created an embedding space there. And this is pretty much what SurferSEO and these other correlational SEO softwares do. They basically sit there and say, basically Google gives you the map. They say, these are all the clusters around these specific keywords. And then you take your website, Surfer or these other softwares, they take your keywords on your page and all this stuff, and then put it into that embedding space. And they see, okay, how much of this cluster, which points in this cluster does this query fulfill? Now, if you basically fulfill the cluster and make it a full cluster, then there's no such thing as over-optimization. You're basically completing the jigsaw puzzle, for lack of a better way of doing it. Now, when you look at it, everything comes back to money, and so does the algorithm. And what that means is it comes back to information retrieval costs. And so if for Google, there's billions of searches happening a second. There's just so much volume in searches, and Google needs to find the quickest and most relevant search in, a tenth of a second. And in order to do that, it has to basically cluster all the content into different pieces. And the stronger your cluster is, and the stronger that signal is, the quicker it is for Google to go, this is the right cluster to retrieve the result. Does that answer the question?
It does. Yeah, that does. And I think it does draw a line as well into maybe segmenting or segueing into the next one, because this is specifically for health and or YMYL content. And the results were, I'd say not a lot different, but there were varying degrees of results when you moved away from that, And so another detailed finding, another kind of intricacy of what you guys saw was that on-page rankings and this general importance of content coverage, the inclusion of keywords, the inclusion of phrases, and that was beyond just in the YMYL space. So maybe talk about the differences there. Why the segmentation of health versus all the other topics that people could cover, and how does that relate to the on-page factors that you surfaced?
Yeah, because essentially, like the way that I like to explain this is basically there's as many Google algorithms as there is keywords, because every single keyword has its own user engagement metrics, its own algorithm in there. So we we're doing a whole bunch of other stuff that it's going to take too long to explain and not specifically relevant to this question. But essentially, the more that you segment, like let's just take an example, like a one niche. You might only have to write like 2,000 words of content to rank in the top 10. Another niche might be 5,000. The other one might be like keywords. Sorry, not even within the same niche. Even some of them might even be 100 words because it's basically a buy intent keyword. So you really need to segment as much as possible to understand how that niche operates. Because if you're just blindly, and this is what tools like Surfer do really well, it kind of gives you the paint by numbers. It tells you in this specific keyword, if you want to rank, this is the sweet spot. So this is why we segmented everything like that. But from an overall perspective, like beyond what Surfer's done, like we segment things into obviously page load speed and other variables as well, because essentially these are kind of like other ranking factors that lead to that process too. So that's why we've kind of segmented this way. One interesting finding that that we came across in this study that I don't think it's spelled out very well in the actual study is there's specific keyword phrases that kind of signify to Google or to Surfer that this content is poor quality. And I'd say I'm not sure if this is the right way to put it, but essentially if they see a specific phrase repeated across the web, let's just say it's a specific phrase on like, eating chocolate mousse makes you fat, and a specific way that's said, if that kind of phrase specifically or very close to it is repeated across the web, which, writers just kind of repeat other content, it's still 100% unique, but that phrase might be identical. This was a predictor of negative correlation. So that the more unique the content is, the more outside the more fresh and the more variance from what everyone else is, because you look at a writer, they'll just see the top 10 results, pick the 2 or 3 articles and just rewrite that in their own words. And the more kind of away you get from that, we find that that's a predictor of increased quality of rankings.
This might be a good time to bring it up. You tell me, going a little off script here, but there's a concept that's been routinely thrown around as it relates to different core updates, especially helpful content update. And it's this idea of information gain. Like, hey, you have an article, and whether it's an affiliate article, whether it's an informational article, whether it's a comparison, whatever type of article it is, the idea of information gains says basically, what are you bringing to the table that Google has never seen before, that a search engine hasn't seen before? What gain are you providing? I didn't see that directly mentioned in the article, but I'm hearing so many threads in what you started to talk about in information gain. How does that correlate with what you're talking about?
We had a negative correlation there, meaning that it's not specifically mentioned because Eric wrote the article, but essentially what we saw was if it wasn't that way, there was a negative correlation, meaning that if it was that way, there would be a positive correlation. So information gain is the most important thing that you can be doing right now. And like what we're telling our clients is basically user-generated content, like a whole bunch of, and you'll see that since the helpful content update, so we work in the travel space, and we work in different niches, but one of them is travel space. And what we found since helpful content is, this is a very large, multinational like tour operator. And what we've seen in that space is, Joe's blog about Istanbul, who's a local in Istanbul doing his tours, is coming up significantly over these, big multinational tours because he's got that localized content with the pictures that are all of his pictures. He's like, you really need to eat at this little, kebab place here. And this is the kind of content that Google's rewarding more of.
It's fascinating. What's interesting is we talk about your money, your life, and then we transition into this information gain. There's a lot that people can take from that. If you don't want to get into the data nerd, like if you don't nerd out on it, those 2 points right there are super fascinating from just a very high level, just a very approachable way to look at something like this, right?
And I'll give you another one that a friend of mine who runs a very large site has done. So he works in kind of like e-com, but it's kind of like it's basically an e-com site. But what he's done is he basically pays people to unbox the products, and then he gets a refund from the product. So he pays someone to be a professional unboxer. So they review products, right? And then someone just gets all these products delivered to their house, and then they just take the photos of them unboxing the whole thing, and then they put it back together again, and they get a refund on it. And they do this with thousands of products. And just having that unboxing process inside the content has worked really, really well for him.
Fascinating. That is very, okay. Well, we might come back to that if we have some time. I have a couple more questions I could go off on, but I want to make sure we get to everything. Another thing that you surfaced is user intent. And this has long been discussed, but I'm curious to hear more from you on your findings. You specifically seem to segment informational content in this part, and talked about how optimization, like it really, you guys found that it needed to be better optimized for SEO compared to, say, buyer intent content. And I thought that was interesting. I wanted to hear you maybe share more about your findings there.
Yeah. So essentially, like the raw binary data is like the raw binary data. And like what I'm giving you is my interpretation of that data.
Perfect.
That makes any sense.
Yeah.
On top of that, the 0 and the 1, positive, negative. From a buyer intent perspective, it's incredibly how do I put this? Like, from a user intent experience, the way to look at it is that because Google's processing power has increased significantly, they're able to use more user engagement signals inside the algorithm now. And because they're able to use more user engagement signals, they are actually using them a lot more. And what you'll find, if you're in a highly competitive niche, what you'll find is that we have clients that have very large backlinking budgets, like, $50,000 a month plus, and going up from there as well. And so what we found is that, like, no matter how good the content is, how aggressive, we might have a velocity of like 3 times of our competitors for link building for a specific keyword term. And no matter how much we do, we still can't shift the top 3 positions. And you will have noticed that intuitively as well. Like, you're like, well, this one's never going to move.
Yep.
Doesn't matter how many links I build and how much content I do around it, it's just never going to move. And so what we're telling clients now, okay, cool, we're spending $50,000 a month. We've hit it really aggressive. We clearly should own, the top position. But the top position in those highly competitive keyword terms comes back to user engagement metrics. So what we've been doing, we're actually calling it ERO, engagement rate optimization. So we do conversion rate optimization, but we focus only on engagement rate signals. So we're doing CRO like in the sense of like it's A/B testing, but instead of like, the goal being a transaction, the goal is like keeping a person on that page. How do we do that? Making sure they click through to another page, making sure that they scroll down, making sure all those other kind of like engagement metric signals work really well. And we have this really cool situation with one client. All they wanted was ERO and no SEO. Not sure why, but we were like, cool, if that's what you want to do. You don't want to do SEO. We don't want to optimize the pages. We tripled their traffic in about 6 months just from A/B testing with this process. And this was quite a large e-commerce site too. So that's just a once-off that we had that unique situation where we're able to do that. But from our perspective, it validates that if you just optimize for engagement signals, you will perform well, especially, and most importantly, especially in high traffic keyword terms where they have enough data to do A/B testing.
Just for someone listening, like, what are some things for people to look at maybe when they're evaluating the SERPs and they're looking for signs that a page is going to have higher engagement metrics than others? Because we don't have data on that unless you own the site, right? Unless you have access to the analytics or those sorts of things. So what are some things people can maybe learn from this? Because I wouldn't say this is a new topic, but for a lot of people, seeing this show up in data reports and studies, and obviously we had the Google leaks and we saw a lot of information there about it and stuff. So how can people maybe analyze? Any tips you have?
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, I would just talk about the site that you own. It's probably the best way to look at it. And the way to look at it, I mean, first thing is like, the sniff test and make sure that, your site is actually optimized well, like, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, like, the reason why we started doing this process too is we do traditional CRO, and we're like, man, 95% of the traffic is going to the blog. We're wasting all these opportunities to test in this area. And that's, and that's what people need to kind of look at. They're like, most of the traffic goes to the blog. So why not test on that? And why, if you just get a 0.1% of an increase in conversion there, that will filter through to your site, overall. People just kind of look at it as like kind of dead traffic, but essentially the way that we approach this process is obviously we set everything up properly, all the tagging, all the tracking. But what we're looking for is a couple of different things. We're looking for kind of scroll depth. So basically clicks, hovers, and scrolls, which is we know what the Google quality raters are kind of looking for: clicks, hovers, scrolls. And so what we do, let's just say there's an article on 7 tips on how to lose weight. We set up heat map trapping for that page, but there's also other softwares that will sit there and show you hover time on a specific area.
Yeah.
So let's just say that you have 7 tips on how to lose weight. Now you put the heat map trapping on there, and you'll see that people will look at, tip 2 and tip 4 and tip 6 a lot longer than the other tips. So what do? It sounds really simple, but not many people are doing it. We just put those 3 tips up to the top.
Yep.
And we expand those tips out. And consistently, you will get a higher engagement on that. Besides all the usual stuff, which obviously most people's headers are too big, or the advertising block is way too big and things like that above the fold. You just need to kind of get them past above the fold. But that's a really, really simple, actionable thing that people can do.
It's great.
And that's not hard. You don't need to be a CRO specialist to do that. It's like, put heat map tracker software in there, see where people are actually spending time on that page, move them to the top. And that comes back to the user intent. That's pure user intent, right? Because there's someone's typing in how to lose weight, and those 3 tips are the ones that they like. You're basically creating the best positive feedback loop for Google you can possibly ever get.
Do you ever get stuck in your business and wish you had someone you could turn to for solutions? Well, I think you should consider joining the Niche Pursuits community. You'll get weekly calls with experts on growing a successful online business, and you'll also get assigned a small mastermind group where you can solve your business problems as well as share your wins. For a limited time, I'll let you try out the Niche Pursuits community for just $1. Go ahead and use coupon code PODCAST at checkout in order to get your first month for just $1. Again, that's coupon code PODCAST. Go to community.nichepursuits.com today and see what it's all about. And maybe I'll see you on our call next week. Thanks a lot.
I just want to double down on what you said. Like, so much can even be learned just by having an objective look at your page and understanding how it is for a reader and not for you as a content creator, because you can get so wrapped up in the way you present your content, following a system, the way you thought about it, but you're so wrapped up in the research you did, the writing you did, and all that, but looking at it from that third-party perspective, if you can, to look at it and how a reader would engage with it.
And data doesn't lie, man. You might think you might have had the most beautiful baby in the world, but data doesn't lie.
Yep.
So to bring it back to, there's often a common thing where and we've started to see this pattern as well, because we really are looking at everything quite differently. We don't look at things from Ahrefs, or like we don't just sit in the SERP results and go, all right, this is high DR, this is low DR. We actually go and analyze each site. And an example of what to do in this situation, you're like, all right, everything's a DR 50 plus in this niche, right? And then you have 1 or 2 DR 20s. It's like, why are those 2 DR 20s? And why? You're like, oh yeah, they're just testing, some sites and try to create some, variance in the search engine results. What you'll find a lot of the time, those smaller sites offer something to the user that other sites don't. And a really good example of that is we were working in a really highly competitive supplement niche. And we had sites of DR 60 and a plus in that niche, and like really, strong sites, being well established. And there was this one DR 20 something site in there. And we're like, what is that doing there? We click on it, and it was a pink website sites for women's supplements. What does that tell you?
That's interesting.
At least half the people searching for the traffic are women, and half the people that want to see that pink site, and that pink site is converting for them.
I was going to say that appeals to a large enough group of people. They make themselves into the top 10 and stay there because of those metrics.
Exactly. And so when we do look at that, when we're looking for that variance, and we're like, okay, obviously as most of your viewers, listeners, I don't know what the definition here is, but all of the above. So when we do see those like anomalies, like, because obviously we're analyzing, okay, there's top 10 results, there's, 4 authority sites we can't take over. These are the 6 we can take over. Why, how can we take them over? And so when we're looking at that, we're not just looking at it from a content length and backlinks to page, we're looking at it from an engagement metric.
Let's move on if we can. Got a long list here. Got to get through it all. Let's keep going. This is good. We could probably do a podcast on each of these topics. The next one, super interesting. This is maybe the one I thought I spent the most time on. I'll just leave it there. Website speed. Website speed and especially a couple of factors: time to first byte, HTML file size, some things that really are interesting to nerd out on and talk about. So, hey, look, website speed has been something Google has dangled before our eyes for years. It's like, get your site faster. We're going to start penalizing you for it. Never did. There still isn't perceived to be an outright penalty for a slow site, but there certainly does. And again, I'm repeating what people talk about in the industry. There certainly does appear to be like a tiebreaker effect. Is that no longer the case? Is it no longer a fast site is a tiebreaker to win? And how important did you guys find specific aspects of site speed in terms of rankings?
I would disagree that the website speed has never been a factor. It's always been a factor. Like that's pretty much a given. And also think about the Google crawler, right? The Google crawler has to go and crawl, trillions of pages daily. Like, it's not going to sit there and wait whilst your site takes, 7 seconds to load on a WordPress thing, right? So that's the first thing. So I think it's always been kind of a big thing. And I think that I do find that with technical SEO, a lot of people get stuck on page speed and think that if they just solve the page speed, that everything will just solve from that, because it's a very quantifiable metric. Your website is this slow. If you increase it, they seem to think that it magically solves everything, which we know it doesn't. But at the end of the day, as far as a healthy diet, you need to make sure that you have that in your diet. You're not going to just you're not going to win the SERPs because you have a one pixel website that says the keyword or whatever. That's not how it works. But definitely positively correlates in all of this stuff. So I definitely think it's important to do. But I do find a lot of technical SEOs and people obsess over this metric much more than other metrics. Like for us, it's probably a tertiary or what the other one is after that, but it's not the primary metric that we go after. Now, the other thing that you mentioned there about HTML5 file size, this we've never seen actually mentioned anywhere before. And this is a novel finding that we've found. And basically the size of the file has been positive. The larger the file size, the positive correlation with increased rankings. Now, why is that? We don't specifically know, but we can, I suppose, assume it's because it's the breadth and depth of the content and all the kind of meaning that's associated with that thing. Not having a buggy, inefficient piece of code, but actually the elements inside there, lots of images, lots of media and things like that. So this is something that we found that was quite interesting. And that I don't think that's actually ever been found before.
Now, that increased, the correlation increased substantially in the March core update. And you said in the article, this matches squarely with Google's statement that user experience is its priority for helpful content update. Time to first byte is the most important factor, as it was 5 years ago, but HTML file size was kind of new. So, is it just because helpful content is breadth and depth? And so how does that play into site speed?
Yeah, I think for me, it says it all in the name, helpful content. What's helpful content? Is it 800 words of content on a page? Or is it someone unboxing, the thing and having the detail and all that process? It really, for me, it comes back to that media richness, or I suppose web experience richness. That's how I would interpret this. It doesn't mean you go out there and just whack a whole bunch of HTML on your site and do that process. It means the more features you have on your page, the more HTML code you have. Therefore, the more that your page, like a simple WordPress site that's a themed WordPress site that everyone has the same template, that's not going to perform well these days. You need to have that dynamic content, whether it's animation, specifically not animations, but that's JavaScript. But you understand, it needs to have that fully textured experience. And so, yeah, I don't know why that's like that with the thing, but that's a unique finding.
Interesting. Okay. Maybe we can just navigate into the second half of the conversation into recommendations, right? It's always difficult to make blanket recommendations, I find, from stuff like this, but certainly using the data to help suggest people look into certain areas, go down certain paths, potentially consider certain things for their site. Let's get into recommendations. I'll just start at the top from the things you guys sort of surface. A lot of this might be playing back on things you've already talked about, but maybe we'll try to put a bow on it so people can know where to go with it, right? First half of the podcast was really about the findings and the details of those findings. Maybe second half is really where do we go? So I think the first thing that you guys recommended, or one of the things you recommended, the first thing on my list is to enhance the topic coverage. Where do people go with that? How do they analyze that? And and by the way, a second part of that question is, what do you recommend doing in areas where they can't enhance topic coverage, either because of budget, because of time, because of knowledge, expertise, gaps, stuff like that?
That's a really good question. Budget's always an issue, right?
We both run agencies. That's always one of the first things that come to mind, right? But even budget for someone running their own site and needing to hire other people to help them with these kinds of things, topic coverage, it's expensive.
Yeah. So essentially, the way that we approach SEO is very different from many other agencies. And what I find is that people are very divorced from the search engine results page. So they basically go into Ahrefs or whatever their tool is, and they extract the keyword list and go low keyword difficulty, yellow or green, and then do this thing. And they're like, all right, content writing team, take this information and rate the content, and this is what we see, right? And this used to work. And so now what we do, so we challenge so many assumptions in this space, and people, when they hear topic coverage, are like, I need to write more content. And this is not the case. The case is the quality of the content that you write for each keyword that you're going after needs to be like, we kind of have like a oneness with the keyword that we're going for. Like our head of SEO has been doing SEO for more than 15 years. And we've got sites ranking with more than 10 million a month traffic with 20 pages. And that's it. But the reality is those 20 pages cover the topic well. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like, they're all like 15,000 word bloody, essays. It just means that we understand what the search engine, the results pages are showing us, and we can kind of fulfill the queries within that. And so this comes back to the kind of like whole topical map area. Like, you want to be as efficient to Google as possible. So creating a topical map and kind of like filling out those kind of like content clusters in a specific way that there's two things. There's the BERT LLM, where you want to make sure you kind of hit all the kind of points that need to be hit within a cluster. Then there's the user experience process. So the hitting the points is quite easy to do, and someone that can just kind of like be very binary can hit those points quite well. The second part is more nuanced. And the second part is like, okay, what are people looking for here? And this coming back to that example of like, 7 tips to lose weight, which are the most important tips that we see? Like, let's just say there's a list of like reviews, right? And you have 10 review, let's just say it's best vacuum cleaners of 2023, right? And what we do is we can basically analyze all those the top 10 list results, and actually put each specific vacuum cleaner that's actually listed in each one, see which ones are the same across all of them, and put them first. So we're really dissecting the search engine results. We're not just going, all right, we need to write about 10 vacuum cleaners. Let's pick 10 vacuum cleaners. Go, all right, out of those results, which ones have the same vacuum cleaners? Maybe there's a correlation there between these ones, because there's 50 pages exactly the same, but these are the 10 that seem to work. Maybe people tend to hover over that area more. So we really try to go the extra detail, because essentially we're not interested in writing. Everyone has the same. These correlational tools like Surfer and they're no longer a competitive advantage. 8 years ago, they were very much a competitive advantage, but not a competitive advantage. Everyone has the same tool. What's the competitive advantage now? It's actually being tangible in search engine results. And another thing that we've done with a client recently, because I just get tired of clients coming to me and saying, oh yeah, we're writing 4 blog content pieces a week. We're trying to rank for best vacuum cleaners, and we're writing all this content. And I'm just like, it doesn't work. And I said, look, show me all your content strategy for the past year. And so we do a lot of backlinking. That's really where the strength is, but this is different to this topic. But essentially we said basically, give us all the topic contents you wrote about vacuum cleaners, fridges, explain how many pieces of content that you wrote, and let's do a baseline metric for the past 12 months, if that actually went up or not. Lo and behold, it didn't. Because essentially you're creating a whole bunch, and that's just once off with a client, but I was just trying to they weren't able to get it. And I was like, look, let's do the data process on this, right? You've written like 12 pieces of content about vacuum cleaners in the past year, but they've all been shallow pieces that don't have any real value to users. and you haven't gone up in rankings. Writing more content is not going to solve your problem. 12 pieces or 36 pieces is not going to solve this problem. So if we're really trying to like hammer home this process of how to get that depth there.
So if we look at content depth then as more than just writing more content, would you say that's a more holistic way to look at what topic coverage means? Or are there any additional features that people can think on?
So bringing it back to the BERT large language model, which is everything that this whole algorithm is based on, or this part of the algorithm is based on. So we have a client in the casino niche, right? And in that niche, we had to go down to the level of how playing cards are manufactured. What materials are they used in playing cards and all these different things, because we really have to understand all the topical maps within that area. And that's irrelevant from a user experience, and that specific keyword would not show up in Ahrefs because no one's like typing it, how are playing cards manufactured. But from the LLM perspective, it needs to be there.
Got it. Yep. Second thing, high level thing, and we haven't really talked about it. We've kind of talked about it without talking about it. EEAT, specifically called out for health, but really I sensed you guys were talking about it across the board. It's not a new topic for a lot of people, but what came out in terms of very tactical recommendations from this study as it related to that topic?
So, there was a Parasite SEO update that kind of hit like in May. We've been working with a lot of clients at the moment, specifically on with there has been an absolute annihilation in the Parasite SEO space, or like on let's call them new sites space in the past like 3 months. And it hasn't really been that public because most people kind of have blog sites. They're not really across that whole Parasite SEO phase. Even if they are buying Parasite SEO sites or actually buying links from these places, we have seen Google has been incredibly aggressive in this area. We've worked with a lot of clients come to us. They've lost millions of dollars of revenue daily, and they come to us and we've had to kind of do reconsideration requests and all that kind of stuff. The one thing that I can tell you is that we have, in a lot of it is to do with site reputation abuse, which is what it as. And part of the issue in that process, and this is a little bit off topic and probably a little bit higher level than most of your audience, but just to kind of get the concept in the head. Basically, the site reputation abuse comes from external writers writing on your platform and then leveraging your platform to rank higher. Now, in one of these situations, we had we're working with some of the biggest Parasite sites in the world, to be honest with you, and the sites that that have actually been hit, that you would know the sites. And one of the ways around that process was that basically the client basically took a writer, Parasite SEO, like very large news site, client, right? And the client and the Parasite SEO site got hit because they were very, very aggressive with what they were doing. Not our recommendations, but it worked really well for a very long time. And basically what our client did was they basically employed one of the writers from the Parasite SEO site and basically said, and they basically paid the Parasite SEO site a salary for that employee. And so they basically took their employee, put it across the Parasite SEO site like a full-time employee. And now that person now works for the Parasite SEO site and says, hey, Google, we actually work with this site now. So anything that you said before is incorrect because this person actually works for this thing. So that's not really relevant to most people out there, but for some people that are listening that are having this issue, this is one way to get around that process. Now, to bring it back, what we're doing with these clients is we're basically having to go through and do massive author audits, and a lot of these sites will have so many freelancers it's like the backlink. It's like, backlinks, any backlink work, before the first algorithm update. And it's the same thing with authors now. Any author worked before and now it doesn't work anymore. So the way that we approach authors is like a backlink. We look at the author profile, we look to see what, we type in, author, search operators into Google and see what they rank for and what articles they rank for. If they rank for crypto, they're not going to be writing about payday loans, or cannabis, or all these other things. So we basically make sure that the backlink or the author is relevant to the topic. And the second thing that we do as well is we make sure that we're trying to implement that with clients, is making sure that there's a chief editor across everything, which is really easy. It's not hard to do. And if you have a lot of freelancers working on your site, then you just make sure that there's an editor that's actually name is attached to all this stuff, all the usual signals that you know about authorship.
Perfect. Another topic that you brought up in terms of recommendations, and we've touched on it, but we touched on it from more of the theoretical, the site speed. Improving site speed is important. Like, how do people navigate the nuances of improving site speed? And I'll say, because you brought it up, I think it's a fair point to say, like, it's not just about having a WordPress page with a bunch of content on it, because that's not going to increase readers' happiness. It's not going to increase their engagement. So you're having to add additional elements, whether it's as basic as, say, YouTube embeds, or more complicated, like features that engage them, animation, GIFs, quizzes, these interactive elements, but that can have a drain on site speed. So maybe from a high level, like, how do people think about improving site speed in a day and age where they also need to improve engagement metrics kind of simultaneously?
Yeah, I mean, essentially it comes back to servers as well, right? It comes back to server and time to first byte and all this stuff. So obviously, the simplest solution for that is obviously a dedicated if you're doing WordPress, having a dedicated WordPress. We use WPX hosting. They're quite good and cost effective. Other people use WP Engine. That would be the first place that I would start. It'd be like, what is your server? Is it WordPress, dedicated? Is it optimized for WordPress? Yes or no? If it isn't, then move across to WPX hosting. And WPX hosting doesn't have those traffic limitations that WP Engine has. That would be probably the first place to look. Then it's like, it's just the usual stuff. It's like making sure that there's not a whole bunch of unnecessary code on the site that's slowing everything down. And yeah, like the thing is like you find that, like, if people are building their own WordPress sites, and the thing about when you use like a dedicated WordPress hosting solution is you can't use all the plugins that you want, because they have their own versions of those plugins too. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. Yeah, you just kind of bring it across, and you might have had some optimization, speed optimization software on your WordPress site, but then you can't put them on because they basically they have their own variations of that. So I would say that's the quickest and most effective way. Beyond that, it's basically making sure that the problem is there's a lot of people that are building these WordPress sites are not developers. And so they basically have the issue that we see a lot of is conflicting plugins that are out of date and things like that, and they're unnecessary for that specific page. The other issue that you'll see a lot of is unnecessary code from a tracking perspective. And specifically if they're running display ads, you'll find that a lot of these ads are codes is super clunky. Like some of them, like Mediavine is like super slow. Like you'll find that some of these ad blocks are really, really, really slow. And another, just to riff off that a little bit as well, with all these updates that happened in the past, 18 months, obviously advertising space on a page, like Google's guidelines, I think are 30% of the page can have advertising on it. And what we found was basically, like, you go on a site these days, you go on Search Engine Journal, for God's sakes, like it's just like an assault. It's like, you're lucky to find the real original content on there, right? Like, I don't know how. And what you'll find with like Mediavine, and I'm not saying Mediavine specifically, but what you'll find a lot of the time is you'll set the aggressiveness or the amount of display area that your ads will take on a specific, you might go, I only say 30% because that's the safe limit for Google, right? And they might even tell you that. But on the back end, if you actually render that out across, different, devices and browsers, it might be taking 45% of that space. And that's certainly the case for me with Search Engine Journal. So people need to be super aware that even if they click the 30% button on their display advertising software, that it's not necessarily the case. And you'll see it anyway. You go on your phone, you'll see like you have to scroll forever just to get, a paragraph of content. So this is a really big thing, and that's not necessarily related to site speed, but it kind of is as well, because it does come back to user engagement. From
a high level, I think like having mastermind and collaborated on this testing, this article, like, are there any other high level takeaways you would want people to know or consider as they look at this data? Because for a lot of people, the HCU and the March core update had a lot of emotion tied to it. So is there anything else that the data says that we didn't discuss, or that you really think is important that people walk away kind of as we close here?
No, I would actually like to say something else, you know, and I think that is, people need, like, this process that he went through. You know, we've had a data scientist on the team for about a year now. The process he went through with analyzing this data has made us infinitely better SEOs, because we've really had to like look at multiple variables and just kind of think about it. And the output might be, you know, a publication on a search engine journal, but the real output and the real gain for us is really understanding understanding the mechanics. And the way that I envision the future is that every single SEO company or media, whatever, if they're working in this space, they have a data scientist in their company that specifically tracks the algorithm for their specific keyword. And this study, we kind of like inherited. As I said, it wasn't our study to begin with, so we kind of had to work with the framework that was already there. But I would sit there and say that if you created a kind of like a framework for a data study within your specific niche, every time there's an update, you just extract the data out and then run it again, you know, and try to like, what I'm encouraging people to do is to kind of like be in charge of your own algorithm, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because essentially
it's so nuanced for every query and every space and every niche.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like you really, really want to understand it, and the data's there.
Yeah, I mean, you're highlighting on the health topic specifically, but really, I mean, to your point, like you could highlight every segment, every sector, and then you get into localization, you get into all these factors where the algorithm isn't just the algorithm; it's a lot more nuanced.
I really encourage people to get into this space, because this is the future. This is really what it comes down to, and like, you know, like I want to collaborate with more people in this space, and but at the end of the day, like it's just like we need to flip the script, and we need to own more of what happens in this space, as opposed to freaking out and then, you know, trying to find the thing on Search Engine Journal or Search Engine Roundtable. Like, what do we do here? What do we do here? It's like, you know, like there's a certain empowerment in that process.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brie, thank you for the study. Thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about the study. Where can people follow along with what you're doing?
We'll have a website. I don't actually publish anything, to be honest with you. So my website is White Light Digital Marketing. It's WLDM.io. And like we offer services like we're doing a whole bunch of other really cool, like really cool stuff with machine learning and link building, all this stuff. But it's all unpublished because it's all secret squirrel stuff, because we like to keep it for our clients. But essentially, if they want to reach out to me, it's Brie, BRIE at WLDM.io. And that's simply me.
Brie, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's a great chat.
Cheers.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Niche Pursuits podcast. I just wanted to remind you that if you are ready to start building smarter, faster, and easier internal links, you should check out Link Whisper. You can get $15 off Link Whisper when you use the coupon code PODCAST at checkout. Head over to linkwhisper.com and use the code PODCAST in order to save $15. Thanks again for listening.